Today we're taking a look at the Cooler Master TD500 Mesh ARGB gaming PC case. Cooler Master sent over the TD500 Mesh along with the XG850 Plus Platinum Power supply that I'm using in this build for a review. The TD500 Mesh is positioned as an ultra-value gaming PC case. This Cooler Master case features a mesh front panel. As the name implies, it comes packing three 120mm fans out of the box. The TD500 Mesh certainly has some unique design elements that help make it stand out amongst the competition in addition to its cooling performance. We'll take a quick look at what's included with the case, the specs, and I'll be building a 12th gen RTX gaming PC inside. The TD500 Mesh comes in a few SKUs or variants. The model that I have here today is the black version with the mesh controller. The case is also sold in a white version with and without the mesh controller. The accessory kit is relatively standard except for the SSD mounting. Cooler Master is using a pushpin style mount here that we'll come back to in a little bit. As for the specs on this case, we're taking a look at a mid-tower that supports motherboards from mITX up to ATX and has support for SSI CEB EATX boards up to 12 inches by 10.7 inches. This does come with the understanding though that you are going to cover the cable management pass-throughs with the larger motherboards. I see this case positioned as being almost exclusively used in gaming PC builds, so I don't think this is really an issue for too many people. The tempered glass side panel is unique in that it has an etched design that follows the polygonal shapes and lines from the front panel of the case. As far as the aesthetics go, the case definitely stands out among competitors in this price range. Three included ARGB fans are the Cooler Master Sickleflow PWM 120 model fans. These fans support ARGB lighting control and can push a maximum of 62 CFM worth of air at a maximum static pressure of 2.5mm to H2O at the max rotational speed, which is 1800 RPM. The fans are capable of spinning down to as low as 650 RPM if you're looking for more of a silence optimization type build. Stacking three fans in the front of the case like this really helps to ensure that you get good airflow, good air pressure through the case, which leads to better overall system temperatures and cooling. The TD500 Mesh continues the trend of being cooling friendly by allowing for a maximum air cooler clearance of 165mm. This is pretty high, so you should be able to fit most air coolers in this case. For air cooling configurations, you can either install three 120mm fans in the top and the front with one 120mm fan at the rear, or you can opt for two 140mm fans in the front and on the top. As for water cooling configurations, the TD500 Mesh will support up to a 360mm rad on the front as well as the top of the case, with the potential for one 120mm rad at the rear. Moving on to the storage capabilities, you will have mounting for up to two 3.5-inch hard drives that also support 2.5-inch drives, and you're also going to get four additional 2.5-inch drive mounts, two of which are on the rear side of the motherboard tray. The other two are on top of the PSU shroud in the front of the case. In my setup, I don't have RGB SSDs, so I put them in the back of the motherboard tray, but if I did have some RGB flash drives, I would definitely be using those on the PSU shroud locations. In terms of the PSU compatibility, you're getting about 180mm of PSU clearance in the PSU shroud with the hard drive cage installed. If you don't need the hard drive cage installed and you remove it, you can get up to 295mm in terms of length for the PSU, but I don't really see that being an issue for too many builds. The TD500 Mesh also has a PSU shroud cutout so that you can see the RGB elements on your PSU if you have an RGB enabled power supply like the Cooler Master XG850 Plus that I'm using here. There's about 19mm worth of cable routing clearance, which is nice to see. This clearance definitely helps to make sure that the build process is easier. Switching back to the front of the case, you can fit up to a 410mm long graphics card in the case, which should maximize GPU compatibility. With the length of this case, you should have enough room to comfortably go with a full custom water loop. You are getting three total mesh filters in this case. You're getting the front mesh panel, the top mesh filter, as well as the bottom PSU mesh filter. This is definitely going to help keep the dust out of the case and reduce the interval for cleaning. In terms of building a gaming rig inside of the Cooler Master TD500 Mesh, it was an overall pleasant experience, and I think it paid off well at the end. I really like the finished look of this build. The cable routing and the space for cable management really helped to keep the build look clean to maintain that high-end gaming look. Subjectively speaking, I really like the design of the polygonal shaped front cover on this case. I also like that they tried to keep that theme going with the tempered glass by etching the lines from the front panel across the side of the case. As you saw in the build, I did opt to cool my 12600K with the Silverstone PF240 ARGB water cooler. I do think if you pick up the TD500 Mesh, you're going to like the ARGB of the front fans so much, you're definitely going to want to pick up a few more RGB fans for either the top, the rear, or your heatsink, whatever you happen to use. In terms of performance, during real bench testing, the P cores and the E cores never exceeded 50 and 45 degrees Celsius respectively during the stock 8-hour test run. With a 5 GHz P core and 4 GHz E core overclock at 1.3 volts, the P cores averaged 71C and the E cores averaged 62C. In my standard 1-hour AIDA64 CPU test, both the P cores and the E cores were averaging about 46C and 42C. With the overclock applied, the P cores averaged 65.5C and the E cores averaged about 60C. Lastly, I always like to give Prime 95 a spin in new gaming builds. This test is mostly for the die-hard overclockers out there, but it does give you an idea of absolute worst possible case and total cooling performance of the case and the CPU cooler. For the stock 1-hour run, operation was pretty smooth sailing. The P cores averaged 62.1C and the E cores averaged 55C. With the overclock applied, the P core average rose to about 89.5C and the E core average rose to about 74C. This was a relatively good showing of cooling performance, so I suspect that this case will absolutely support any i5 stock or overclocked build. I also think that there's enough airflow to really support an i7 or even an i9 gaming rig inside of this case, whether it be for gaming or gaming and streaming or production usage. In terms of the front panel I/O, you have two USB 3.0 ports, obviously the power button, you do have a reset button, and you have one 3.5mm audio headset jack and one 3.5mm microphone jack. It would be nice to see USB-C on this, but given the price, it makes sense that they weren't able to include it. Overall, I really like the Cooler Master TD500 Mesh case. It's an all-around awesome buy. You're getting the ARGB goodness, a unique front panel and side glass panel design, and importantly, your gaming rig is unlikely to suffer from poor case airflow because the TD500 Mesh is set up pretty well in terms of cooling. For the price, this case competes aggressively, in my opinion, for the price range. I would definitely recommend the Cooler Master TD500 Mesh case to anyone who is looking for style and performance.